A split-second decision in the harsh glare of an ordinary afternoon changed two men's lives forever. Sirens cut through the quiet hum of daily life, though the real crime was happening behind the badge. Power has a funny way of blinding those who wield it recklessly, twisting their perception until they believe they are untouchable. When an arrogant patrolman decided to assert his dominance over a disabled black veteran merely trying to cross the street, he expected absolute compliance. He expected fear. Instead, he met a pair of cold, unblinking eyes that had stared down organized crime syndicates and international terrorists. One bad decision, fueled by prejudice, set off an explosive chain reaction that would completely obliterate a corrupted career. Sunlight baked the pavement of Oak Ridge, a suburban enclave that prided itself on manicured lawns, quiet streets, and a general air of undisturbed peace. For Harlan Whitaker, it was a sanctuary. He had traded the relentless, adrenaline-soaked concrete canyons of Washington, D.C. for the slow, predictable rhythm of this Midwestern town. He navigated the sidewalk of Elm Street with the practiced ease of a man who had long accepted his physical limitations. His motorized wheelchair hummed quietly, a steady mechanical companion that had replaced the use of his legs years earlier. Harlan was a man carved from mahogany and granite. Even seated, his posture was immaculately straight, his shoulders broad beneath a crisp, light blue button-down shirt. Silver peppered his close-cropped hair and neat beard, framing a face lined not just by age, but by the heavy burdens of a life spent peering into the darkest corners of human nature. He had a serene, resting expression, though his dark eyes missed nothing. They constantly scanned his environment, a lingering habit from decades of federal service. He tracked the delivery truck turning the corner, the stray dog sniffing a fire hydrant, and the young mother pushing a stroller 3 blocks away. It was an involuntary reflex, the ghost of an operational mindset that refused to entirely fade. Today's mission was simple: a trip to the local corner grocer to pick up fresh basil and a newspaper. He held a small, reusable canvas bag on his lap, enjoying the gentle afternoon breeze. Oak Ridge was supposed to be safe. It was the kind of town where people nodded to each other on the street. But Harlan knew better than most that trouble rarely announced itself with trumpets. It usually arrived dressed in the mundane. Cruising down a commercial strip sat Officer Derek Langford. Derek was thick-necked and carried himself with a permanent, tight-jawed scowl that he mistook for authority. He gripped the steering wheel of his police cruiser with white knuckles, his mirrored sunglasses reflecting the passing storefronts. To Derek, the uniform was not a symbol of public service. It was a license. It was a shield that justified his worst impulses. Beside him sat Officer Caleb Voss, a young rookie fresh out of the academy, still possessing the naive belief that the job was entirely about helping kittens out of trees and saving lives. Caleb was currently shifting uncomfortably in the passenger seat, sweating through his uniform, largely because his training officer had been ranting for the past several minutes. "You see, Caleb, it's about establishing the baseline," Derek barked, his voice a gravelly sneer. "These people come into our town. They think they can just loiter, bring down the property values, act like they own the place. You give them an inch, they take a mile. You have to show them who holds the leash." Caleb swallowed hard, staring out the window. "Who? Who exactly do you mean, sir?" Derek let out a sharp, humorless bark of laughter. "Don't play dumb, kid. You know exactly what I'm talking about. The element, the ones who don't belong here. You can spot them a mile away. They don't respect the law until you make them respect it." Derek had a personnel file that read like a masterclass in borderline misconduct. Numerous excessive force complaints over the years, many of them involving minorities. All of them had been mysteriously dismissed or settled quietly by a police union that protected its own, enabling his escalating behavior. Chief Victor Thorpe, a stern, old-school lawman, had repeatedly tried to find the smoking gun needed to strip Derek of his badge, but the patrolman was cunning. He knew where the camera blind spots were. He knew how to write a report that painted the victim as the aggressor. Derek survived on technicalities and a deeply ingrained departmental reluctance to admit they had a bad apple rotting the barrel. "Just watch and learn, Caleb," Derek muttered, accelerating the cruiser past the speed limit just because he could. "Today, you're going to see how real police work gets done. No more of that textbook garbage they fed you at the academy." Back on Elm Street, Harlan approached the intersection of 4th Avenue. The pedestrian crossing light glowed a steady white silhouette. He checked both ways, a lifelong habit, and engaged the joystick on his right armrest. The wheelchair rolled smoothly off the curb ramp and onto the asphalt. He was halfway across the street when the canvas bag on his lap slipped. A small jar of expensive artisanal honey he had bought as a treat rolled off his lap and shattered on the pavement, spreading golden syrup and glass across the white lines of the crosswalk. Harlan sighed, a sound of mild annoyance. He stopped the chair in the middle of the road, putting it in park, and carefully leaned forward to assess the mess. He couldn't easily bend down to clean it, but he didn't want a car to puncture a tire on the thick glass shards. He reached into his side pouch to grab a small rag, intending to push the larger pieces toward the gutter. At that exact moment, the roaring engine of a police cruiser turned onto 4th Avenue. Officer Derek Langford was at the wheel. Derek slammed on the brakes, the cruiser's tires squealing in protest as the heavy vehicle lurched to a halt merely feet from Harlan's wheelchair. The sudden, aggressive stop sent a jolt of adrenaline through the rookie, Caleb, who braced his hands against the dashboard. "What is this idiot doing?" Derek snarled, his face instantly flushing with unwarranted anger. He slammed his palm against the steering wheel horn, letting out a prolonged, deafening blast that shattered the quiet suburban afternoon. Harlan flinched slightly at the jarring noise but did not panic. He slowly straightened his posture, turning his head to look over his shoulder at the cruiser. He raised one hand in a calm, apologetic gesture, pointing down at the shattered glass and the spilled honey, signaling that he was temporarily delayed. To a reasonable observer, the situation was clear. An elderly, disabled man had dropped something and was figuring out how to manage it. To Officer Derek Langford, it was an egregious act of defiance. It was a black man in a wheelchair holding up his road, refusing to instantly scatter at the sound of a police horn. "Oh, you've got to be kidding me," Derek growled, unbuckling his seatbelt with violent speed. "Look at this guy. Thinks he owns the damn street. Probably intoxicated or looking for a payout. Sir, he's in a wheelchair." "It looks like he dropped something," Caleb started, his voice trembling slightly. "Shut up, Caleb. I'm handling this," Derek snapped. He kicked the cruiser door open and stormed out into the afternoon heat, his hand instinctively resting on the butt of his service weapon, an intimidation tactic he used as naturally as breathing. Harlan watched the officer approach through the rearview mirror attached to his chair handle. He noted the aggressive, wide-legged stride, the flushed complexion, the flared nostrils. Harlan had profiled thousands of violent offenders. He recognized a man high on his own artificial authority instantly. A cold, familiar stillness washed over Harlan. The gentle retiree vanished, replaced entirely by the methodical, analytical mind of a seasoned federal agent. "Hey, what the hell do you think you're doing?" Derek bellowed as he closed the distance. "Move that rig to the sidewalk right now. You're obstructing traffic." "Good afternoon, officer," Harlan said, his voice a deep, resonant baritone, perfectly calm and devoid of the fear Derek was seeking. "As you can see, I've had a minor spill. There is broken glass on the road. I was attempting to clear the larger pieces so no one damages a tire. I'll be out of the way in just a moment." Derek stopped a few feet away, looming over the seated man. He despised the calm in Harlan's voice, He hated the articulate, educated cadence. It challenged the pathetic little hierarchy Derek had built in his mind. "I don't care what you drop," Derek sneered, stepping closer, his shadow falling over Harlan. "You don't block a public roadway. You don't ignore a police horn. Now get this chair moving before I write you a citation for jaywalking and public nuisance." "The crosswalk light was in my favor when I entered the street, officer," Harlan replied, maintaining direct, unwavering eye contact. "I'm simply trying to be a considerate citizen. There is no need for hostility." The word hostility seemed to short-circuit Derek's limited restraint. The veins in his thick neck bulged. "You want to talk to me about hostility? You—" Derek jabbed a thick, calloused finger toward Harlan's face. "Listen to me very carefully, old man. I don't know where you came from, but around here, when I say jump, you ask how high. I'm telling you to move, and I am telling you—" "I will move when it is safe to do so," Harlan said, his tone dropping an octave, carrying the icy weight of absolute authority. "Step back." Officer Caleb Voss, who had cautiously exited the passenger side, stood awkwardly near the hood of the cruiser. "Derek, come on," he muttered weakly. "Let's just help him kick the glass aside." "Stay out of this, Caleb," Derek roared without looking back. He turned his furious gaze back to Harlan. The defiance in the black man's eyes was driving him to the edge. Derek leaned down, bringing his face inches from Harlan's. He could smell the faint scent of peppermint on Harlan's breath. "You think you're smart, huh?" Derek whispered maliciously. "You think sitting in that chair gives you a free pass to disrespect the badge? I've dealt with your kind before. Arrogant, entitled. Let's see how tough you are when you're eating pavement." Without warning, Derek reached out and grabbed the left armrest of Harlan's motorized wheelchair. With a violent, wholly unjustified heave, he jerked the heavy chair sideways. The abrupt motion threw Harlan off balance. His torso slammed against the side guard of the chair, a sharp jolt of pain shooting up his paralyzed spine. The tires screeched against the asphalt as the heavy machine tipped precariously on two wheels for a terrifying second before slamming back down with a heavy thud. "Hey!" a voice cried out. A woman, Lila Bennett, the owner of the local bakery, had stepped out of her shop onto the sidewalk, her hands flying to her mouth in horror. "What are you doing to him? Leave him alone." Derek ignored her. The adrenaline of violence had taken over. "Get out of the chair," Derek demanded, spittle flying from his lips. "You are under arrest for resisting a lawful order and assaulting an officer." Harlan slowly righted himself in his seat. The pain in his back was a dull roar, but his mind was crystal clear. He did not raise his voice. He did not swing his arms. He looked at the hand Derek still had clamped on his armrest and then slowly looked up into the officer's manic eyes. "Assaulting an officer?" Harlan repeated, his voice dangerously quiet. "You put your hands on me, son. You have just made a mistake that you will not be able to undo." "Shut your mouth!" Derek yelled. He grabbed the lapel of Harlan's light blue shirt, bunching the fabric in his fist, preparing to physically drag the disabled man from his chair onto the broken glass covering the street. "Show me your hands. Give me your ID, now." A small crowd was beginning to form on the sidewalks. Cell phones were being drawn from pockets, camera lenses pointing toward the intersection. Officer Caleb Voss was paralyzed by indecision, his hand hovering near his radio, his face pale as a sheet. "I am not resisting," Harlan stated clearly, ensuring his voice carried to the recording bystanders. "My identification is in my inner left breast pocket. Since you have my right arm pinned, I suggest you retrieve it yourself, but I advise you to read it very carefully before you make your next move." Derek scoffed, yanking Harlan forward by the shirt one last time before roughly shoving him back against the seat. "Don't give me advice, criminal," he spat. He reached his heavy hand into Harlan's jacket, roughly patting the man's chest before his fingers closed around a thick leather wallet. Derek pulled it out, a triumphant, ugly smirk twisting his face. "Let's see who we're dealing with here. Let's see what kind of warrants you've got hiding." He flipped the leather wallet open. Derek expected a standard state driver's license, perhaps an expired ID. Instead, the sunlight caught the immediate, unmistakable gleam of heavy gold. It was not a badge you could buy in a costume shop. It was thick, meticulously crafted, and carried the weight of the federal government. Recessed into the black leather next to it was a rigid photo identification card. The stark white background contrasted with the stern photograph of the man sitting in the wheelchair. Printed across the top of the card in bold, uncompromising letters were the words, "Federal Bureau of Investigation." Below that, a title, "Special Agent in Charge, Counterterrorism Division." And finally, a stamp in red ink across the bottom. "Retired. Full credentials retained." The air seemed to violently rush out of Derek's lungs. The ugly smirk froze on his face, rapidly morphing into an expression of sheer, unadulterated panic. The color drained from his skin so quickly it looked as though he were suffering a cardiac event. His thick fingers holding the wallet began to visibly tremble. He stared at the badge, then down at the man in the wheelchair, then back at the badge. The realization hit him like a freight train. He hadn't just roughed up a disabled civilian. He had just assaulted a retired high-ranking federal agent in the broad daylight in front of a dozen witnesses with cameras. Harlan watched the bully crumble in real time. He felt no pity. "Read it aloud, officer," Harlan commanded. It was no longer a request. It was a direct order from a superior. The quiet dignity had shifted into the crushing presence of a man who used to coordinate massive raids. Derek stammered, his mouth suddenly dry as sandpaper. He couldn't form the words. The oppressive heat of the sun felt like it was melting him into the pavement. "Read it aloud," Harlan repeated, his voice cracking like a whip across the silent intersection. Federal Bureau of Investigation," Derek whispered, his voice cracking. He looked like a child who had just been caught playing with a loaded gun. "Special Agent Harlan Whitaker." Harlan calmly reached up and plucked the wallet from Derek's shaking, unresponsive fingers. He tucked it back into his pocket with deliberate slowness. "You have a very poor understanding of the law, officer," Harlan said, his eyes drilling into Derek, "and an even poorer understanding of human decency. You assault a disabled man over a shattered jar of honey. You invent crimes to justify your aggression." "Sir, I thought," Derek babbled, taking a frantic step backward, his hands held up as if trying to ward off a physical blow. "I didn't know who you were." "That is exactly the point," Harlan said, leaning slightly forward, his voice dropping to a terrifyingly quiet register. "You thought I was a nobody. You thought I was someone you could abuse without consequence. Your respect is conditional based on the power you perceive the other person to hold. That makes you a coward, son. And cowards have no business wearing a badge." Harlan turned his attention to the terrified rookie standing by the cruiser. "Officer, what is your name?" Caleb practically snapped to attention. "Voss, sir. Caleb Voss." "Officer Voss," Harlan said clearly. "Radio your watch commander. Tell him to contact Chief Victor Thorpe immediately. Tell him Harlan Whitaker requires his presence at the intersection of 4th and Elm. Tell him one of his officers has just committed felony assault under color of law." "Yes, sir. Right away, sir." Caleb scrambled back to the cruiser, diving through the open window to grab the radio microphone. Derek looked wildly around. The crowd of bystanders had grown. Lila Bennett was holding her phone up, recording every second. Other people were murmuring, pointing. Derek looked back at Harlan, sheer desperation replacing his previous arrogance. "Agent Whitaker, please," Derek pleaded, his voice a pathetic whine. "My career, I have a family. I made a mistake. I was having a bad day. We don't need to bring Chief Thorpe into this. I'll apologize. I'll clean up the glass myself." Harlan just looked at him, his expression completely devoid of sympathy. He had spent his life locking away men who thought they were above the rules. He recognized a predator trying to play the victim when cornered. "Your bad days do not grant you the right to inflict terror on the citizens you are sworn to protect," Harlan replied coldly. "You don't care about the mistake. You only care about the consequence. Stand on the curb, Officer Langford, and wait for your chief. You and I are going to have a very long afternoon." Defeated, humiliated, and trembling with fear, Derek slowly backed away. The arrogant swagger was gone, replaced by the hunched posture of a man walking toward the gallows. He stepped onto the curb, unable to meet the eyes of the citizens he had terrorized for years, waiting for the sirens that would signal the absolute end of the life he knew. Minutes dragged like hours under the unforgiving Midwestern sun. The intersection of 4th and Elm, usually a quiet snapshot of suburban life, had transformed into a theater of absolute humiliation for Officer Derek Langford. He stood rigidly on the curb, sweat pouring down his flushed neck, staining the collar of his uniform. The citizens of Oak Ridge, people he had routinely intimidated, harassed, and bullied, now surrounded him. They held their phones like shields, recording his every twitch. Lila Bennett stood at the front of the crowd, her bakery apron dusted with flour, her phone aimed squarely at Derek's defeated face. Harlan Whitaker remained exactly where he was, his wheelchair parked near the spilled honey and shattered glass. He did not gloat. He did not taunt. He simply watched Derek with the terrifying, analytical stillness of a predator that had already broken its prey's neck and was merely waiting for the twitching to stop. The distant wail of a siren finally broke the heavy tension. It wasn't the standard whoop of a patrol cruiser, but the deep, authoritative roar of a heavy SUV. An unmarked black Ford Explorer tore around the corner, its hidden grille lights flashing a furious red and blue. It came to a sharp, controlled halt, blocking the rest of the intersection. The driver's door opened and Chief Victor Thorpe stepped out. Thorpe was a massive man in his later years, built like a brick wall and possessing a scowl that could freeze water. He was old-school law enforcement, a man who believed in the sanctity of the badge and deeply despised anyone who tarnished it. He had spent years trying to legally untangle the department from Derek's toxic influence, constantly thwarted by union red tape and a lack of indisputable evidence. Thorpe took in the scene in a split second. He saw the shattered glass. He saw the rookie, Caleb, looking like he was about to vomit. He saw Derek sweating through his uniform. And then he saw the distinguished, older, black man in the motorized wheelchair, waiting with impossible calm. "What in God's name is going on here?" Chief Thorpe's voice boomed, carrying easily over the murmurs of the crowd. Derek saw a microscopic sliver of hope and lunged for it. He stepped off the curb, his hands out in a placating gesture. "Chief, listen. It's a massive misunderstanding. I was responding to a road hazard, and this individual became non-compliant. He refused a lawful order to clear the roadway, and when I attempted to assist him—" "Assist him?" Lila Bennett interrupted, her voice cutting through Derek's lies like a razor. "You didn't assist anyone, Derek Langford. You screamed at him. You grabbed his wheelchair and you nearly threw him onto the pavement. I have the whole thing on video." Thorpe held up a massive hand, silencing both Derek and the baker. He didn't look at Derek. Instead, he walked slowly toward Harlan, his eyes narrowing as he took in the man's military straight posture and the cold, unyielding stare. Thorpe was a veteran. He knew the look of a man who had seen the worst of the world and conquered it. "Sir," Thorpe said, his tone respectful but cautious. "I am Chief Victor Thorpe. Are you injured? Do we need to call an ambulance?" "I do not require medical attention at this moment, Chief Thorpe," Harlan replied, his deep voice projecting absolute authority. "Though my lower lumbar region took a significant jolt when your officer attempted to violently overturn my mobility device. What I require is for you to secure your man." Harlan calmly reached into his breast pocket, retrieved the heavy leather wallet, and flipped it open, presenting the gold shield and the retired SAC credentials. Chief Thorpe stopped dead in his tracks. The color drained from his weathered face. He leaned in slightly, his eyes tracing the raised letters on the badge and the unsmiling photograph on the ID card. Thorpe swallowed hard. The hierarchy of law enforcement was deeply ingrained in him, and he knew he was looking at a man who used to command more federal resources before breakfast than Oak Ridge had in its entire annual budget. "Agent Whitaker," Thorpe said, his voice dropping an octave, instinctually snapping to a slightly more rigid posture. "It is an honor, sir, and a profound disgrace that we are meeting under these circumstances." "The disgrace belongs entirely to the man standing behind you, Chief," Harlan said smoothly. "Officer Langford initiated an unprovoked physical assault, attempted an unlawful detention, and threatened me with fabricated charges of assaulting an officer. He did this because he believed I was a defenseless civilian holding up his traffic lane." Thorpe slowly turned around. The look on his face was terrifying. The years of frustration, of dealing with Derek's complaints, of watching the man skate by on technicalities, all culminated in this single, undeniable moment. "Chief, I didn't know," Derek blurted out, panic entirely consuming him. "He didn't identify himself. If I had known he was federal—" "If you had known he was federal?" Thorpe roared, the sheer volume making Caleb jump. "Is that your defense, Langford? That you only assault the people you think are nobodies? That you only abuse the citizens who can't fight back?" Thorpe marched toward Derek, stopping inches from the patrolman's face. "Give me your weapon," Thorpe ordered, holding out his hand. "Chief, please. My union rep—" "Your union rep cannot save you from the FBI, you colossal idiot," Thorpe spat, spittle flying onto Derek's cheek. "Give me your service weapon, your taser, and your radio, right now." With trembling hands, Derek unholstered his Glock and handed it over, handle first. He unclipped his taser and his radio. He looked entirely stripped, physically and metaphorically. The armor of his authority was gone, leaving only a terrified bully exposed to the sunlight. "Take off the badge," Thorpe commanded. Derek hesitated, tears of absolute panic welling in his eyes. He fumbled with the pin on his chest, finally pulling the silver shield free and dropping it into Thorpe's waiting palm. "Caleb?" Thorpe barked over his shoulder at the rookie. "Yes, Chief?" Caleb stammered. "Put him in the back of my SUV. Do not cuff him yet, but if he breathes wrong, you have my permission to use restraints. We are taking this to the station." Thorpe turned back to Harlan, his expression softening into one of deep apology. "Agent Whitaker, if you are amenable, I would like to take your formal statement in my office. I will personally arrange for a specialized transport van for your chair." Harlan nodded slowly. "That will be acceptable, Chief. But make no mistake, this will not end with a quiet resignation. I am going to bury him." The atmosphere inside the Oak Ridge Police Department was suffocatingly tense. Word had spread through the precinct like wildfire. Derek Langford, the untouchable golden boy of the worst clique in the department, was currently sitting in Interrogation Room 2, stripped of his badge and gun, sweating profusely while waiting for his union attorney. Down the hall, inside Chief Thorpe's spacious office, the mood was entirely different. It was quiet, clinical, and deadly. Harlan Whitaker sat in his wheelchair across from Thorpe's heavy oak desk. He was casually sipping a cup of black coffee that the chief secretary had nervously provided. Lila Bennett's video file was currently looping silently on the large monitor mounted on the wall. It showed the entire encounter in brutal, undeniable high definition. Derek's aggressive approach, the screaming, the violent jerk of the wheelchair, and the immediate, terrifying production of the federal badge. "It's worse than I imagined," Thorpe sighed, rubbing his temples as he watched the footage. "I knew he was a liability. Agent Whitaker, I've tried to terminate him multiple times over the years, but the Civil Service Board, the union, they always found a loophole. The victims were usually individuals with prior records or incidents that happened in blind spots. It was his word against theirs." Harlan set his coffee cup down. The ceramic clicked sharply against the coaster. "That is exactly why I'm sitting in your office today, Victor," Harlan said. The use of the chief's first name wasn't a sign of friendship. It was a subtle assertion of dominance. Thorpe looked up, confused. "Sir? You live in Oak Ridge now. I assumed you were just out for an afternoon errand." "I was out for an errand," Harlan replied, his dark eyes locking onto the chief. "But my presence in Oak Ridge is not entirely about enjoying my retirement." Harlan leaned forward, resting his forearms on his armrests. The gentle suburban retiree completely dissolved, replaced by the brilliant, calculating mind that had dismantled organized crime families on the East Coast. "When I retired, I retained my security clearance and my consulting status with the Department of Justice," Harlan explained quietly. "Specifically, I occasionally do favors for the Civil Rights Division. Months ago, an old colleague noticed a statistical anomaly in your department's use of force reports. Specifically, a spike centered around one Derek Langford." Thorpe's jaw tightened. "You've been investigating my department?" "I have been observing," Harlan corrected smoothly. "A quiet preliminary probe. We were looking for a pattern of deprivation of rights under color of law. 18 U.S.C. Section 242. We knew Langford was a menace. What the DOJ lacked was an airtight, undeniable incident with a totally unimpeachable victim, someone whose character could not be assassinated by a slick union lawyer." Thorpe stared at Harlan, the realization dawning on him, heavy and profound. "You... me?" Harlan confirmed. "Now, let me be clear. I did not intentionally drop that jar of honey today. I did not bait your officer. I simply existed in his space and experienced a minor inconvenience. But when he chose to accelerate his cruiser, blare his horn, and step out of that vehicle with violence in his heart, he gave me exactly what I needed." Harlan pointed a steady finger at the monitor replaying the assault. "What you are looking at on that screen is not just grounds for termination, Chief. It is the cornerstone of a federal indictment. I have already contacted the regional FBI field office. 2 special agents are en route right now to take custody of Langford." Thorpe leaned back in his leather chair, exhaling a long, slow breath. The sheer magnitude of the trap Derek had blindly walked into was staggering. Derek thought he was bullying an old man. Instead, he had assaulted the exact federal investigator sent to build a case against him. It was a spectacular, self-inflicted destruction. "He's done," Thorpe whispered, a mix of relief and awe in his voice. "He's absolutely done. He will never wear a uniform again. He will never carry a firearm again. He is going to federal prison," Harlan stated, his voice devoid of any emotion. It was simply a fact etched in stone. "And we are going to use this incident to audit every single use of force report he has filed over the years. Any officer who covered for him will be implicated. We are pulling this rot out by the roots." Meanwhile, in interrogation room 2, the door clicked open. Derek practically jumped out of his chair. "Finally, where's my rep? Where's... He trailed off. It wasn't his union representative standing in the doorway. It was Chief Thorpe, and right behind him, rolling smoothly into the starkly lit room, was Harlan Whitaker. Derek's stomach plummeted. The air in the small room instantly felt colder. Harlan parked his chair near the metal table, blocking the exit. He looked at Derek not with anger, but with the cold, clinical detachment of a scientist observing an insect pinned to a corkboard. "Officer Langford," Harlan said, his voice echoing slightly in the bare room, "I believe it is time we discuss your future, or rather, the complete lack thereof." Silence stretched inside Interrogation Room 2, thick, heavy, and entirely suffocating. The space was designed to induce psychological discomfort, painted in sterile institutional gray, and illuminated by harsh fluorescent lights that hummed with a low, relentless electric buzz. For years, Derek Langford had used this exact room as his personal theater of intimidation, looming over petty criminals and terrified citizens, leaning heavily on the battered metal table to extract whatever narrative suited his reports. Now, the dynamic had violently inverted. He was the one trapped in the unforgiving glare, while the man he had assaulted sat calmly across from him, entirely unfazed by the sterile hostility of the precinct. Harlan Whitaker did not blink. He remained perfectly still in his wheelchair, his posture impeccably straight, his dark eyes fixed on the disgraced patrolman. He did not offer anger or vindictiveness. He simply let the crushing weight of the moment press down on Derek, watching with the cold, clinical detachment of a scientist observing an insect pinned hopelessly to a corkboard. The gentle retiree who had been navigating a crosswalk an hour prior was completely gone, replaced by the formidable aura of a seasoned federal operative. Derek paced the short length of the room, his heavy boots scuffing the linoleum. He was sweating profusely, dark patches blooming under the arms of his uniform shirt. His breathing was ragged, shallow, and fast. The sheer, unadulterated panic was finally breaking through his thick skull, eroding the last pathetic remnants of his ego. "My union rep," Derek finally choked out, his voice cracking, devoid of its usual gravelly bark. He stopped pacing and gripped the edge of the metal table, his knuckles turning white. "Nolan Graves. I am not saying another word until Nolan gets here. You can't just interrogate me like this. I know my rights." Chief Victor Thorpe, who had been standing silently by the closed door like a massive, immovable sentinel, let out a low, humorless scoff. The sound was entirely devoid of warmth. "We are not interrogating you, Derek," Thorpe said, his voice a deep rumble of absolute disgust. He crossed his thick arms over his chest. "An interrogation implies that we need answers from you to piece together what happened. We don't need a single word from you. We have the high-definition video from Lila Bennett. We have the dash cam audio from your own cruiser. And we have the sworn testimony of Officer Voss, who, by the way, has already provided a comprehensive statement detailing your unprovoked violent aggression." Derek's head snapped toward the chief, a look of profound, venomous betrayal crossing his flushed face. The realization that his own rookie had turned on him felt like a physical blow. "Caleb, that spineless, treacherous little—" "Careful, son," Harlan interrupted smoothly. His baritone voice sliced through the stale air of the interrogation room with surgical precision, instantly silencing the patrolman. "Insulting the primary witness to your federal crime will not endear you to the judge during your detention hearing. I highly suggest you manage your temper before you dig this hole any deeper." Derek opened his mouth to retort, but the words died in his throat as heavy footsteps echoed rapidly down the hallway outside. The heavy metal door clicked and swung open. Nolan Graves, the notoriously aggressive, fast-talking attorney for the local police union, stepped into the room. Usually, Graves entered an interrogation room like a hurricane, shouting down internal affairs investigators, threatening lawsuits, and burying legitimate citizen complaints in mountains of convoluted bureaucratic red tape. He was the shield that had kept Derek employed for years, but today, Graves carried no swagger. His normally ruddy face was pale and drawn, and he was sweating almost as heavily as his client. He held a digital tablet in his slightly trembling hands, his eyes locked onto the screen as if it were a live explosive. "Don't say a word, Derek," Graves ordered instinctively, though his voice completely lacked its usual arrogant bite. It sounded hollow, almost defeated. He looked nervously at Chief Thorpe, and then his wide eyes landed on Harlan Whitaker, sitting quietly in the wheelchair. Graves visibly swallowed hard, the Adam's apple bobbing in his throat. "Chief, sir, I need a private moment with my client right now." "You are welcome to it, Mr. Graves," Harlan said pleasantly, smoothly maneuvering his motorized wheelchair backward to give the men space, the electric motor purring quietly. "I strongly suggest you review the encrypted file the Department of Justice just expedited to your office inbox. Specifically, I would draw your attention to the preliminary indictment drafted less than an hour ago by Assistant United States Attorney Elias Wyatt." Graves looked down at his tablet, his thumb swiping frantically across the glass screen. He opened his email, found the flagged DOJ communication, and began to read. As his eyes tracked across the digital document, all the remaining color drained entirely from his face. His shoulders slumped, the fight instantly leaving his body. "What does it say, Nolan?" Derek pleaded, taking a desperate step toward his lawyer. The fear in his voice was raw and pathetic. "Tell them they can't do this. Tell them it was just a street encounter, a misunderstanding over traffic protocol. You've gotten me out of way worse than a ripped shirt and a shoved chair." Graves slowly lowered the tablet to his side. He did not look at Derek. He couldn't. He looked directly at Harlan, a profound, crushing realization settling over him. The Union could not fight this. To even attempt a defense would invite a catastrophic federal audit that could dismantle their entire organization. "Derek," Graves said, his voice barely a whisper, echoing faintly off the cinder block walls. "This isn't an internal affairs probe. This isn't a suspension with pay. This is an 18 U.S.C. Section 242 charge, deprivation of rights under color of law. They have a signed federal warrant for your immediate arrest." "What?" Derek staggered backward as if he had been physically struck in the chest by a sledgehammer. His eyes darted wildly around the room. "For a shoving match? For a crosswalk violation? For a patterned, documented history of egregious civil rights violations culminating in the physical assault of a retired federal agent," Harlan corrected coldly, rolling his chair back into the center of the room. "You see, Derek, bullies like you always make the exact same fatal miscalculation. You mistake restraint for weakness. You thought the badge you wore gave you unquestionable immunity from consequence. It merely gave you a larger rope to hang yourself with." Before Derek could formulate another desperate, pathetic excuse, purposeful, synchronized footsteps echoed down the hallway, distinct from the frantic pace of the lawyer. Chief Thorpe reached out and opened the door wider, stepping aside with a look of grim satisfaction to reveal two individuals dressed in sharp, meticulously tailored dark suits. Special Agent Donovan Hale and Special Agent Lena Brooks of the Federal Bureau of Investigation had arrived. They wore their gold credentials on thick lanyards around their necks, their expressions entirely devoid of sympathy or hesitation. They represented the absolute pinnacle of law enforcement, a stark, humiliating contrast to the corrupt, sweating patrolmen cowering by the table. "Harlan," Agent Hale said, his voice professional and crisp, nodding respectfully to the man in the wheelchair. "Good to see you, sir. Though I certainly wish the circumstances were better." "Donovan," Harlan replied with a slight acknowledging nod. The package is all yours. He has been secured. Hale turned his steely gaze directly onto Derek. He did not raise his voice. He didn't need to. Derek Langford, you are under arrest for severe federal civil rights violations and felony assault under color of law. Hale reached to the back of his belt and pulled free a pair of heavy, stainless steel handcuffs. Turn around and place your hands flat behind your back. Nolan, do something, Derek screamed, sheer, unadulterated terror finally breaking his mind completely. He backed up against the cold cinder block wall, his hands raised defensively. You can't let them take me. I'm a cop. I belong here. Not anymore, Derek. Graves muttered quietly, stepping away from his client and moving toward the wall, distancing himself from the radioactive fallout. The union rep knew a totally lost cause when he saw one. Comply with the federal agents. Do not make this worse. Agent Brooks stepped forward with smooth, practiced efficiency. She grabbed Derek firmly by the shoulder, spinning his heavy frame around with professional, undeniable force. The metallic click-clack of the steel handcuffs ratcheting tightly around Derek's thick wrists echoed through the interrogation room like the final strike of a judge's gavel. The perp walk that followed was the ultimate, inescapable dose of karma. Chief Thorpe explicitly ordered that they walk Derek directly through the center of the bustling precinct, rather than using the discreet back exit. The bullpen, usually a chaotic symphony of ringing phones and overlapping conversations, went dead silent as the heavy doors swung open. The same officers who had once high-fived Derek in the locker room, the same peers who had cowardly looked the other way when he crossed the line, now stood completely still. They watched in total silence, their faces masks of shock, disappointment, and disgust as Derek was paraded out in federal chains. The big, supposedly untouchable patrolman was openly weeping, tears streaming down his flushed face, his head bowed in absolute, crushing humiliation as he was shoved into the back of the waiting, unmarked black federal SUV. The heavy door slammed shut, sealing his fate forever. The fallout was absolute, swift, and utterly devastating to the corrupted ecosystem Derek Langford had thrived in for years. Federal justice, when properly motivated by undeniable evidence, moves with the crushing force of a glacier. Assistant United States Attorney Elias Wyatt, a man known for his surgical precision in the courtroom, took one look at Lila Bennett's video and refused to entertain a single plea negotiation. The footage, leaked to local news outlets by an anonymous bystander, had ignited an absolute firestorm. It was a visceral, high-definition broadcast of an arrogant man violently manhandling a disabled veteran. The public relations nightmare forced the city of Oak Ridge into immediate action. Within weeks, the city council convened an emergency session, voting unanimously to strip Derek of his pension and permanently revoke his law enforcement certification. The professional dismantling was only the beginning. Derek's personal life collapsed with equal speed. The badge had been the singular pillar of his identity, the shield that hid his profound insecurities. Without it, he was nothing but a disgraced bully exposed to the harsh light of public scrutiny. His wife, humiliated by the relentless national media coverage and shattered by the undeniable video evidence of his cruelty, packed up their home in the dead of night. She filed for divorce, changed her phone number, and moved across state lines with their children. Derek spent his pretrial confinement in total isolation, staring at cinder block walls, finally experiencing the terrifying helplessness he had so routinely inflicted upon others. When the trial finally commenced months later in a federal courthouse downtown, the atmosphere was electric with anticipation. Derek Langford sat at the defense table, wearing an ill-fitting civilian suit, looking pale and significantly smaller than he had on the streets of Oak Ridge. He kept his eyes locked on the mahogany table, unable to meet the gaze of the packed gallery. It was a massacre. Harlan Whitaker took the witness stand with the same icy, unshakable calm he had displayed during the assault. He did not embellish. He simply laid out the facts in his resonant baritone, detailing the unprovoked physical escalation and the threat of fabricated charges. His quiet dignity filled the courtroom, completely eclipsing the desperate, scrambling narrative of the defense attorneys. The final nail in the coffin came from an unexpected source. Former rookie Caleb Voss, having chosen to cooperate fully with federal investigators to clear his own conscience, took the stand. Voss bravely recounted Derek's toxic mentorship, detailing a deeply ingrained pattern of racial profiling and habitual abuse of authority. The jury deliberated for a short time. When the foreperson read the verdict, guilty on all federal counts of depriving a citizen of their civil rights under color of law, Derek openly wept. The presiding judge, a stern woman with zero tolerance for police corruption, delivered a blistering reprimand. She sentenced him to years in a federal penitentiary, followed by years of strict supervised release. Given his former status as a police officer, he would serve his time in protective custody, locked in a cell for nearly all day, entirely removed from the society he had failed to protect. Back in Oak Ridge, the heavy atmosphere that had long suffocated certain neighborhoods began to fundamentally shift. Chief Victor Thorpe used the immense momentum of the federal investigation to ruthlessly clean house. He implemented strict, transparent use of force protocols, mandated rigorous de-escalation training, and pushed out two other officers who had historically covered for Derek. Caleb Voss, having demonstrated tremendous personal growth and genuine remorse, was installed as a liaison for community outreach. Slowly, methodically, the department began the arduous work of rebuilding the public trust it had allowed one bad apple to destroy. As for Harlan Whitaker, his life gracefully returned to its quiet, predictable rhythm. He still navigated the sun-dappled sidewalks of Elm Street in his motorized wheelchair. He still enjoyed the gentle afternoon breeze. But the town genuinely felt different now. The invisible shadow of fear had lifted. One crisp autumn morning, later, Harlan was making his scheduled trip toward the local corner grocer. As he approached the intersection of 4th and Elm, he noticed Lila Bennett sweeping the pristine sidewalk in front of her bakery. The sweet scent of rising dough and cinnamon drifted on the breeze. She paused, leaning comfortably on her wooden broom, and smiled warmly at him. "Good morning, Harlan. The new batch of artisanal honey just arrived from the farm. I saved a jar specifically for you behind the counter." Harlan stopped his chair, returning the smile. It was a genuine, warm expression that deeply crinkled the corners of his dark eyes. "Thank you, Lila. I appreciate that more than you know. Let's hope I can manage to hold on to it this time." "I think you'll do just fine," Lila laughed, her voice bright and clear. "The streets are much safer these days." Harlan nodded, putting his wheelchair into gear and rolling smoothly across the freshly paved street, the crosswalk light glowing a steady, bright white. He had spent his entire career fighting monsters in the dark, but he had learned a profound truth. Sometimes, the most enduring victories happened in the broad daylight simply by refusing to back down. True power does not reside in a badge, a uniform, or the ability to inflict physical dominance over others. It lies in unyielding integrity and the courage to remain steadfast in the face of tyranny. Derek Langford believed his authority was absolute, mistaking his cruelty for strength and the silence of his victims for submission. He tragically failed to realize that true justice is blind to rank, but hyper-aware of arrogance. By attempting to break a man whose spirit was forged in the fires of federal service, Derek engineered his own complete destruction, losing his career, his family, and his freedom. Karma, when it finally arrives, rarely knocks politely. It kicks the door down. Harlan Whitaker proved that quiet dignity will always outlast loud prejudice, transforming a moment of suburban vulnerability into a masterclass of righteous, uncompromising accountability that forever changed a town.